All right, folks, we are back with our learning session. So today I want to talk all about the color correction tools within Wirecast. In fact, they're actually very simple. There's not even a lot to cover here, but for those of you who have never used it, don't know it's there, I thought I would be remiss if I didn't cover color correction in Wirecast. This is something that we added in Wirecast 7, and I think is a really critical tool for anyone doing any live video production. Anytime you need to make some adjustments, most of the time you want to do your color correction on the camera side first, before your signal even gets to Wirecast. But for some reason, if you're using media that was already shot and the white balance wasn't fantastic to begin with, or if you need to just make a correction on the fly, or you have multiple cameras and you need to try to make them match a little bit better, this is where you do that. I would love to set up a tutorial where I set up cameras and I deliberately throw off their white balance, or we just try a bunch of different mixed shots. Today, I can't cover it that much in depth, but the principles will apply and you'll see what I mean. So I'm going to launch my desktop here and I'm going to show you all about the color correction tool here. For those of you who don't know what white balance means, it's really what is the temperature or the color value of the whites in your shot. So my my shirt here is sort of a light pink, but if the camera was off or something, it might show up as more of a white. And looks like got a little bit of green screen showing there, so we'll need to fix that at some point. I think we've been moving the lights around the studio. But the point here is just that depending on what your camera sees as a level of white, that's what's going to set all the other colors in relation to it. And that really affects how the signal will look. Things can start to look really blue or tinted more, to the red level. It just depends. They might be too warm. They might be too cold. There's a whole sort of science behind color science and color correction that I would actually like some time to learn a little bit more about myself, and then maybe come back and we can do a learning session more on the theory of color and theory of color correction. That's not something I can show you today, but what I can show you is the practical application of those theories in Wirecast. So I'm going to open a new project here, and I'm going to launch Wirecast, just a new document. And what I'm going to do is bring in my my camera to start with. So I'm just going to go up here. I have the new shot already selected. There's no sources in it. I'm going to zoom in. I'll add the video camera shot here, which is the one you're seeing me on. So that's my green screen right behind me. And let's just take a look at what we can do just right off the bat. Actually, let's add one or two more sources. Well, no, I'll just show you where things are located. Then we'll go into the other sources that I have. So first up in the inspector window here, you'll see on the next sort of tab right there is what's called the shot layer properties. That means that whatever is selected in this shot layers, and there can be up to 50 or more different sources in here if you really want to load up a single shot. Whatever one is selected, if you click over to layer properties, then we can edit things about that particular element in this shot and do that without affecting necessarily other things. So you'll see right below here we've got this crop and color. The drop downs by default they're just turned off. You need to open them up to start changing things because Wirecast has its own default settings for color and color correction. And even right here you could see there's a difference in the way that I'm looking kind of on my screen here versus how I look in the camera to you right here. So there's a bit of a difference right there. I want to actually take the color correction here of the shot itself. I'm going to just adjust these different sliders, and we'll see how that affects things. So these should look pretty standard to you if you have ever done any kind of color correction, worked in Photoshop, or done anything with sort of digital video or digital media software. But we can basically do a whole bunch of adjustments. Now, we also have the reset button, which we'll be using kind of frequently. So the first thing we can do is with the color values that are already here, the green looking the way it looks, and my shirt looking the way it looks, and my face and skin looking the way they look, you can actually sort of suck the color out just by lowering what's called the saturation value. And that will eventually, if you take it all out, you'll get to what's basically a black and white or a gray image, which might be a look that you want to go for. The other, of course, the opposite is to really punch it in, and now you can see the rosiness of my cheeks here. Obviously I'm looking like I have that like liver disease where you get all yellow. It's no good, right? But the green is really going insane there. That's full color saturation, which means that every color that's on the screen is at the maximum color value that your computer can possibly put it at. So that's sort of oversaturating, and that's taking the saturation out. And if we just reset, we'll go back to a value of 1. Now, the next one that maybe I should talk about is brightness. So this is up at the top here. Brightness is exactly what it sounds like. How bright or dark? Now, you're not actually, normally to change brightness, you need to open or close your camera's aperture settings. And if you're a photographer, it's a great place to learn these sort of basic concepts on how light and cameras capture light. But basically, kind of a way to sort of cheat is to just make a circle in your hand and look through that. And depending on how much you open or close your hand, you're letting that much light through. And you'll also notice that your sort of field of view expands or closes. So if you kind of see your eyes maybe like what the camera sees, then if you open this up, you're letting in a lot of light. And if you're, closing it, you're really closing off and making it darker. Now, when we adjust this slider, are not actually doing that to the camera itself. So physically, we're not getting more light into the camera at all, or less light if we adjust this. So the camera is going to do it through software, and it's not going to be quite as effective and sort of real, but it does have a little bit of play in what it can do. But you'll see that if you take it all the way up, what it does is really just make things look whiter. And it washes out the screen. This is about the best software can do when it's trying to change a color value. And so if that sort of makes sense, that's really, you can kind of fake it and make things look a little brighter, but beyond a certain point, they're not actually really technically getting brighter. You're not providing more light. The dark areas of my shirt are going to start to look fuzzy or gray or white without actually looking more defined. If you were actually opening up the camera's aperture itself, the camera could let more light in and it would actually see better into darker areas of the screen. But since you're not doing that, the best you can get is kind of this sort of glowy, whitish, washout look when you adjust brightness. So I don't recommend pushing brightness too high. It's kind of like pushing the gain on your camera. You're not actually, or like a digital zoom, you're not actually getting anything organic or analog into it. You're just sort of manipulating bits and bytes to try to sort of simulate brightness. Same thing with darkness. Again, you're not actually lowering the amount of light. You're just sort of putting a sort of a black wash over the screen. So, but little adjustments within, say, plus or minus 0.1 are generally okay to get away with. So if your camera is sort of bad to begin with and you need to make it match another camera, or maybe it's too bright, better to always, again, make these adjustments on the camera side when you can. Okay. So next up is your contrast. This is cool. This can actually make your image look a little sharper. And I'm going to, I noticed that my screen keeps freezing here, so I'm going to throw maybe 1 or 2 of these down just a second. Hold on. Go back here. Do the 1920 by 1080. All right, and we're going to close off this guy. Okay. So that may or may not fix the freezes, but let's talk about contrast. I like contrast on computers because you can actually make things look a little sharper. What contrast does is it sets the differences between the sort of the light and the dark. And so instead of the grays being, you can see my hair got darker, the shadows get darker, and the lights get brighter. It's kind of a cool way to sort of punch up the differences and make things look more defined. And computers, I think, do this pretty darn well up to a point. At this point, it's not looking that good, but it's sort of like putting makeup on everything in the shot a little bit, a little bit of like again, I'm going to butcher this because I don't know much about makeup, but there's certain types of makeup, like, that call out, like, eyeshadow or eyeliner, which just define the edges. Light and sort of things are represented through lines where basically shadows of light and dark differences, and that's how shapes get defined for our eyes. Contrast can really help bring those out a little bit and make things just clearer and seem almost more real than real. And I like contrast. Particularly slider can make things look kind of cool. Of course, if you want to go the opposite direction, you'll get this sort of washy gray eventually till you just get a straight gray. Now all of the light and the dark are equally contrasty, and it's basically just made everything gray. That's sort of the ultimate end of no contrast. And then, of course, the opposite of that is completely black, right? Too much contrast now just takes over. Now, this is kind of a cool look. You could do almost a whole scene or shot just with extremely high contrast, or if you're planning to, hijack a government or something like that, you might want to hide your identity with full contrast a little bit. Although I'd be interested, it might be possible to sort of reverse that. All right, so there you go. That is the contrast slider. Last but not least, we have gamma and hue. So let's talk about gamma for a second. Gamma is a difficult concept. I actually don't fully understand what it's doing, but to me it has something to do. It's not quite like contrast or brightness, but it looks sort of very similar in a way. It's almost, I like to consider it almost like the background light in an image. I don't really know much more than that, except that it's sort of it does play a role. And if your blacks aren't looking like true black, in fact, there's this thing, I believe it's with different countries like Japan versus the US. They have what's sort of a different level of gamma when it comes to the how colors or blacks are represented on video signals. So if you watch like a TV signal in the US versus a TV signal in Japan, and they had the exact same or sort of the default gamma settings, you would see that they actually didn't look the same, even though you were showing a completely black screen. You need to adjust gamma occasionally to get either take it out or put it back in or get it a little bit larger. And that other than that, you can do some research on it, but it has something to do with some kind of complex math on the way the color gets represented. All right, so that's gamma. Adjust it if you need to. If it's making a difference, ultimately your eyes are going to be your best test. All right, next up is hue. This one's fun because basically all this is doing is sort of rotating the color wheel and making things appear differently. So suddenly greens become blues or vice versa. You'll see what I mean here. So we can just rotate everything. Hue, of course, it just kind of changes everything. Like we can change that background, that green screen to a blue screen as long as and it almost looks totally normal. I look obviously a little pale. My lips look pretty red in this shot, but it's actually kind of cool. You can get some neat effects. So hue can be pretty fun. And this might be the one that you use if you're noticing that a shot is too blue or too white. This is the one you really adjust if your white balance is off. If the camera is representing greens just a little too green or a little too yellowy looking, then you might want to just knock the hue left or right to sort of reset that color spectrum and in relation to all the other colors in relation to themselves. But I love that because it really shows you how much you can just kind of you can manipulate software and to look at how it sees color. It's a great example. All right, so that is my purple screen there. I'm going to zoom out here and let's add a couple other sources here. I'm going to add just a couple pictures to give you an example. So let's say you bring in a camera and you do need to adjust the color. It's not looking good. So I'm going to bring in and go to the desktop here. Go to my test images. I'm going to bring in a blue, orange, and some color bars. Let's start with the orange. This one's fun. So you can see there that obviously we have a bit of a color balance problem, right? The orange is looking way too blue. So this would be a situation where everything else is looking good, right? Focus is good. The brightness is good. All that's looking solid. So what you want to do here is you're going to want to adjust the hue until it gets to the right, until everything's looking correct. So you want that orange to seem true to color. So all we're doing there is we're adjusting the hue slider. And you can see now we have the orange is looking like an orange, and the green leaves are looking incorrect. We could also go, interestingly enough, the other way, and you can see it almost looks better at -50. So +50 and -50, you can think of it as a big circle. They sort of meet at the end. That's where, that's why you often see color wheels or a circular thing associated with this, because really -50 and +50 you're just going to circle back at that point onto itself. So you can get the same correction. You can also, of course, make it look like a grapefruit. You can make it look like a lemon, which is cool. So kind of cool stuff. The way you can mess with color and how much difference that can make just by rotating that color palette through the hue slider. Similarly, let's talk about, this is another good place to look at how hue affects things. We can completely change the rainbow on this shot here. Actually, if I take this shot up to stretch to fit, you can see that hue will just sort of change where things are located. The nice thing about color bars and test patterns is they're actually designed to test more than just color. They're designed to test gamma. They're designed to test contrast and brightness and all kinds of stuff. So, if the brightness is way up and you're seeing these don't look black to you, then you've obviously got a problem there. You need to dial that back to a more normal range. Gamma is an interesting one. If these are looking too much the same, then your gamma, you have a problem in the gamma area. This is you can see that this is a good way to match color and make sure that everything's looking good across the screen. So keep that all in mind. There's a whole science to this that, again, I'm very ignorant of, so I apologize that I can't show you that. But that's exactly the color patterns and the way that they were set. There's actually a very, very interesting story behind why these are arranged in a certain way in order for you to test colors appropriately. All right, so that's sort of my overview of the color correction and color processes and sliders in Wirecast and what you have available to you and which ones are probably going to be most effective. Again, always best to organize, sort of set things on the camera level. If you have multiple cameras, then do the best to make them, exposed correctly and their white balance is correct. Bring them into Wirecast, and then if you still need to make them match, then pick one and make some adjustments either through the hue or the brightness or the contrast to try to get them to look as similar as possible in Wirecast. So when you cut from one camera to the other, they don't look like you're in a completely different scene. You want them to try to match, and having them focus on the same object or the same person for a little bit so you can try to just sort of switch back and forth and make some adjustments using those sliders to make them match is really your best option. And if something looks off to you, trust your eyes, ask somebody else to look at it, and then come in and make some adjustments using those sliders if you've done the best you can upstream on the camera level first. All right, hope this was helpful. Thanks, guys. If you have any questions, please type those in now, but I think we will close out the learning session for today. We will be back next week with more interesting learning sessions, and we will be, of course, doing this every week for more in-depth tutorials. Thanks again for watching Wirecast Live, and I hope this was helpful. We'll see you next time on Wirecast Live.